Because the election is really trending heavily in one direction, we have a situation now where Iowa is in play for Joe Biden. That was unimaginable just recently. And also, Texas is in play for Biden. He's competitive in Texas. Now, I get it. Everybody's going to say, yeah, okay, please. Republicans always win Texas. That's true, which is why I'm skeptical, just like you should be skeptical. And I think it's very likely that even if Trump wins, he'll probably he might edge it out in Texas, but, it's very likely Trump still wins Texas. I'm sure in the average, he's up a decent amount. But there's some polls, recent polls, that have Biden right there within the margin of error. So the Biden campaign from his basement are saying, all right, let's be a little ambitious here because, every day he hides, he seems to go up in the polls because Trump is doing such an abysmal job with COVID and the economy, the real economy is so screwed that people are just like, anything but this guy, anything but Trump. So now look at the new ad that Biden and his team came up with. This is what's running in Texas. Take a look and then I'll dissect it.
I'm thinking of all of you today across Texas. I know the rise in case numbers is causing fear and apprehension. People are frightened, and they're especially worried about their parents, their grandparents, loved ones who are most at risk. This virus is tough, but Texas is tougher. We can stop the spread, but it's up to all of us to do it. We have to step up and do both the simple things and the hard things to keep our families and our neighbors safe. Wear a mask, wash your hands, stay home if you can, and socially distance when you go out. I want every single American to know, if you're sick, if you're struggling, if you're worried about how you're going to get through the day, I will not abandon you. We're all in this together. We'll fight this together. And together, we'll emerge from this stronger than we were before we began. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
So there are two ways I want to break down this ad. The first way I'm going to do it is let me give the left-wing criticism of Joe Biden watching this ad. You watch that, he's talking about COVID-19 and all these problems, but he doesn't bring up, let's do Medicare for all, because he doesn't believe in Medicare for all, even though that would help tremendously in a pandemic when people across the country, millions and millions of people, are losing their private insurance because it's tied to their jobs and they lost their jobs because of the COVID downturn. Medicare for all is the answer. You got to bring it up. You got to talk about the policies because how are we supposed to know that you're actually going to fix this unless you explain to us what you're going to do to fix it? And the way you fix it is Medicare for all, UBI, universal masks. So really, a very serious policy-based ad would call for Medicare for all, would call for UBI, would call for universal masks. There are substantive ways to address this crisis and these crises, but you have to actually address them. You have to actually be specific and explain what we do to defeat it and to move forward and fix the country and help people out. Okay, so that's the left-wing criticism, is there's no policy in this. This is just, a guy with standard political talking points pretending to be a leader. So now I get to the other way I'm going to dissect this ad, which is the view from a normie American. Guys, pretend leadership polls a hell of a lot better than total avoidance. And what is Donald Trump doing right now? Total avoidance of COVID-19. He was doing daily press conferences previously. Then he stopped doing the daily press conferences after he embarrassed himself with, his rant about, got to get the sunlight inside the body, maybe? Can we do that? Maybe we do that. So he stopped doing the COVID daily press conferences. Now COVID-19 is worse than it's ever been in the United States of America, and he's still not doing the daily press conferences, and he hasn't had a meeting with Fauci in over a month. And forget Fauci if you say that's too political. His normal, people who would advise him, who are medical experts or scientists, they're nowhere to be found. He's not even really talking about this. His campaign is admitting that they kind of hope that the Americans grow numb to it and then, forget about it and don't hold it against Trump. So avoidance, which is what Trump is doing on this, it's what Trump is doing on the unemployment crisis, it's what Trump is doing on the foreclosure and eviction crisis. Avoidance polls terribly. People look at you and go, your job is to fix these real problems. You're pretending like these real problems don't exist. If anything, Trump is bragging as the problems get worse and worse. He was just bragging about the NASDAQ. I mean, come on, man. How out of touch are you? So people look at that and they're grossed out. They're like, nope, forget this guy. That is the worst thing you could ever do in this situation. You can't, I know Trump is really good at diversion and marketing and overriding stuff through force of personality and repeating himself. You can't override a pandemic. It's not a PR issue. It's not a marketing issue. It's a real world problem. You can't override it through force of will. That's not the way this works. So a lot of the scandals in leading up to the 2016 election, like Trump getting caught saying, grab him by the pussy, I don't even wait. He just bulldozed ahead. And that was a media scandal that doesn't really directly impact every American in a personal way, like a freaking pandemic does and like a depression does. So he could override it with force of will. He can't override this with force of will. It's not possible. So pretend leadership, which is what Biden is doing here, pulls a hell of a lot better than avoidance, which is what Trump is doing here. Which brings me to my final point, which is, as a general rule and as part of my politics, I reject this notion that returning to normal is something that we should strive for, namely because normal was absolutely terrible. Normal was a situation where 78% of Americans were already living paycheck to paycheck. Normal is our infrastructure getting a grade of D+. Normal is millions of Americans not having health insurance. Normal is 45,000 Americans dying every year because they don't have access to basic health care. I can go on and on here. Normal is endless wars. So I reject this notion of like, well, we got to return to normal and that should be a goal of our politics. No, the goal of our politics should be, how do we fix society? How do we help people? How do we set a floor, a minimum floor, which is reasonable, which gives people a shot at making it and finding real comfort and happiness and meaning? That's what our politics should be about, not a return to normal when the normal was terrible to begin with. However, guys, there's no escaping it. For normie Americans, when you have a pandemic and you have a depression and you have a foreclosure and eviction crisis, as of right now, you tell them, moron reality show host who's avoiding all the real problems and talking about statues, or somebody who's at least nominally going to address these problems, even if the way he addresses it is not real, is not sincere, if it's pretend leadership, at least he's doing something, focusing on it in one way or another. Let me tell you something. In a situation like this, it's almost tailor-made for the instinct of returning to normal to come out in regular people. A moment like this with a depression and a pandemic, it is tailor-made for the return to normal crowd to be able to swoop right back into power. Because you know what? When there is a depression and when there is a pandemic, most normal people say, step one is, let's defeat the depression and let's defeat the pandemic. So in that sense, returning to normal becomes a hell of a lot more appealing to people. So that's why I think Biden is positioned very well leading into this election. Right now, he's an overwhelming, colossal favorite because this kind of fake leadership stuff, people are going to eat it up, man. Basically, Biden is playing the role of, I'm the president in a 1990s action movie. Like, that's the role he has to play. Like, let me give you some fake leadership, some words, make it seem like I'm a leader who has empathy and wants to fix the problems. That might be all that's needed. You got to think about it like this, guys. In 2008, this isn't to diminish Obama's political skill when it comes to campaigning. He's a wonderful campaigner. But in 2008, George W. Bush's approval rating was under 30%. And then you had McCain and Palin versus Obama and Biden. Obama and Biden won. I got news for you. A ham sandwich could have won back then on the Democratic side. Why? Because George W. Bush had under a 30% approval rating. As Noam Chomsky says, this kind of system is the envy of dictators around the world. This standard political stuff from Biden. At this point in time, your normie American's going to go, good enough. And it's not really because of anything Biden did. It's because of things that Trump did not do. That's the best way to look at it.